today. So we'll be presenting and talking about successful strategies with Microsoft 365 collaboration. So this will go into a couple different areas, from a strategy perspective to how to maybe implement that in different ways. And as I mentioned earlier, just a discussion, if you have kind of a scenario that's hard to solve, or you've solved something in a creative way, we absolutely want you to speak up and help the group and others, kind of share with that shared knowledge overall. So I'm presenting today. So I'm Jonathan Schultz. So I'm the president of Apsidien. And one of the organizers of the overall Wisconsin Sharepoint user group. This is a lot of what I do day in and day out are these strategy sessions in different ways. So I've talked to organizations of all sizes about how to use Microsoft 365. I definitely believe there's a difference between, a 20-person company and a 20,000-person company on what you have to do and how you have to handle it. Yeah, the key is as simple as you can, but at some point you can't keep it simple anymore with bigger organizations. Industry also can matter a little bit. So that really just comes down to, some industries are more regulated than others. So there's more security and compliance types of needs to just different types of concepts. Like banking has banks and branches and multiple buildings scattered, while other organizations are maybe centered in a single building or don't have a building at all. So industries and size really will affect your strategy a little bit. So we'll talk about that where need be today. And Apsidien, itself, we're Wisconsin based, so we're in the Milwaukee area. We're focused on Microsoft 365 and the Power Platform, but we do serve clients across the U.S. So it's not necessarily just all Wisconsin based. We work with people all over the place. The beauty of teams. With that, I'm going to go off of camera because I'll be turning sideways a lot today to my other screen. But thank you for your time, and let's jump in. All right, so first is I really start with these principles of collaboration have been my driving way of kind of helping break apart collaboration in an organization, because there's at different times you're doing different types of collaboration. And then based on these different types of collaboration, Microsoft 365 has different tools that work better than others with them. So overall, I think the key is by breaking apart your scenarios into different categories and understanding when to use what will be important to be successful overall. There's also not a black and white answer to this. So live in the gray, love the gray. So if it works for you and your group, it works for you and your group. Move on and succeed, right? But ultimately, from my years of SharePoint background to everything else that's now Microsoft 365, I think the problem always was the cafegimatorium of SharePoint. People initially put everything all into one site, and it just got to be a bundled mess. So, it's not a good gym, it's not a good cafeteria, it's not a good auditorium. But as you break it apart and create those different rooms or different types of collaboration spaces that you need, it becomes a little easier to expand and grow, even though it does add some complexity. So again, company size matters there, because keep it as simple as you can until you have to make it more complicated. That being said, kind of created this triangle where part of collaboration inside of an organization is communicating. So that's news and information and distributing that. It's what do we do? What does this department do? Things like that need to be communicated throughout an organization. It might be just like official documents or templates. So, hey, we have an agenda template that we should use for everything. So where do you put that? How do you use that? It may be product documentation that needs to be official, maybe policies and procedures. So a lot of that is mainly one way, right? There's a couple of authors, lots of viewers to that information. That's kind of the communication side. with the last one being kind of informal communities. Maybe it's a bike to work community or a young professional group, where Yammer and some tools like that may really kick in and be worthwhile. Next is, kind of the hardest area to probably figure out, and lots of choices here. But the reference or process area, as I call it, is where you're going to have large chunks of documents and content you need to organize, manage in different ways. It might be your client files, it might be invoice files, it might be documents related to a process like onboarding, IT change management, things like that. And ultimately, it also could have a lot of lists related to it for tracking that ultimately become applications, maybe Power Apps and Power Automate in the future. So the green area is the most complicated scenario to really kind of think about. But having that separate from other types of workspaces, I think is important to kind of think about in your head, so that as you're strategizing and planning that out for your organization, you might handle that slightly different. The blue space is true two-way collaboration. Lots of editors, lots of viewers at the same time, a lot of co-authoring. This is where Teams really kicks in more and more these days, right? And that could be departments or projects or committees, just ad hoc collaboration or even external collaboration and pulling in people from other organizations. So, we'll talk about the blue area here a lot today too, and break that apart, because inside of teams, especially, there's different types of teams in my mind that we'll cover. Then the last area is kind of just that personal productivity space. So it is your OneDrive for business for files, and people need a spot for their personal drafts and files in different ways. It also could be helpful automations, as I call them. So, just using, tasks or planner tasks or to do for your personal Outlook tasks and things like that, to your own OneNote, to other things like that. Those little add-ons and tools that Microsoft has really can help your personal productivity in lots of different ways. We won't go too deep into this today, but again, you're drafting documents there, ad hoc sharing, I call it, where, yeah, if I just have to share this one file this one time with this one other person, we don't need a whole team or site or anything for that necessarily. I can share that with one other person. That gets challenging because if you do that too much, you get spaghetti sharing and a little bit of a mess. So, I'm a little biased, but I think Google Docs has kind of that issue problem, and because there's less of a shared space there, like a SharePoint or Teams is. And with spaghetti sharing, I shared it with one person, but it actually had to be two people. On this other document, I shared with two people, but not the third person. And it's easy to kind of mess up a little bit, right? From a user perspective, a day-to-day perspective. Once a person leaves, those files kind of go away at some point. A lot of risk there. So it's needed, but keep it light. All right, so then I'm going to break down kind of these different areas and talk them through with some different considerations we see, along with opening it up for others here on the call today to jump in, kind of with either your questions or your scenarios that you've run into as well. So that first top orange part that are communicating out to the organization, at some level, you've got a home site or an intranet where that you can put together to communicate. Departments have a lot of content they want to distribute to the organization at times. Some are heavier than others in that space. So giving them kind of that storefront internally is a good idea with home sites and intranets. We encourage the use of topic and topical pages a little bit more than departments as you grow, especially. So in this case, that would be like, instead of necessarily having like a human resources site, maybe you have a employee benefit site, right? That might not be a department necessarily inside of your organization, but it's the topic that people are looking for when they're looking for the information. And then things like payroll as a topical site becomes better, because now you don't have to guess, is payroll in finance, is it in HR, and where would you go for that? So we'll kind of look at this a little bit as well. Because ultimately, when you're communicating, you're trying to distribute information. So it could be news and announcements. There's a lot of links to other resources throughout the organization. Again, not everything will be in Microsoft 365. So you've got your other tools systems, you've got your ServiceNow systems, you've got your homemade systems, you've got other tools and products that you need to use. It's the document distribution, and this gets tricky. So as people have definitely come from shared drives where they just went to the S drive to find all of the documents for product documentation, the ability to move it more to like an intranet page of product documentation is slightly different, but it's a need throughout the organization, right? A lot of read-only access to bigger quantities of documents like product documentation, things like that. Because you have SharePoint available to you, just pages of information are handy to build out here and distribute as well, right? So again, before with file servers, you're stuck on, got to put in a document so I can share it out to the organization. SharePoint, you can create a web page for it and put information and put a couple different sections together. And some people in your organization will be better at that than others. But trying to allow them to do that in different ways is important. We also find, things like key contacts and frequently asked questions are great to put out there because they're another important item that people keep looking for in some way and can really shortcut someone to get to the end goal, like whether they achieve the task they're trying to do. Hey, how do I log my time? Who do I talk to about benefits? Those may be a little hidden inside your organization unless you've been there a while. So by creating simple structures inside of Microsoft 365, you can distribute a key contact that could be location-based. Hey, not only is it benefit related, but benefits in Wisconsin is more important than benefits in Florida or something like that. So it might be different people in different areas. And then frequently asked questions, it helps people think about why would people ask, what do people ask your area that you need to distribute? And it also leads in great to future things like Viva Topics or Microsoft Search over time, where you can really integrate some of that across the platform that way. So some things to consider in my mind for these communication sites. So sometimes your intranet is somewhere else. So you've just invested, you just built it. It's a Kentico or just some platform you're already using that it needs to stay in. I would still consider creating at least a home site or quote unquote a launch pad inside of Microsoft 365. So there's kind of a central landing area where you can use to redirect people out to other things you're going to build throughout the system. So that'll be helpful, to say, hey, well, here's where your teams are, or here's where the product documentation is, things like that. You don't duplicate things you're doing on your other intranet, but just linking throughout the Microsoft ecosystem from there is a good idea. We also see people making that heavily search focused, kind of like a Google page, right? Just a search box. You're in Microsoft 365, here's how you search, go search and find things. I mentioned it a little bit before, while it's easy to kind of create departmental sites, really start to think about blending in topical sites and pages more than departments over time. The kicker is, departments give you ownership, which is a good way to decide how to build a page, create a physical site when there's a physical owner, single owner to that area. But the topical pages, you can kind of build out from there. Think of the end user, the person using your tool, not necessarily how you're organized as an organization, right? How you're structured, things like that. Departments change too, the reporting structures, the names. So getting to topics that are more like employee benefits, payroll, those stick around a lot longer. From a Microsoft SharePoint perspective, especially, we use and we encourage the use of like content types and then the P&P search web parts so that we can let people add things like key contacts to multiple sites, but then roll them up into single pages in different places, right? So everyone can add their key contacts in a list on their site, but then we have a page globally on the internet that's like all the key contacts, and you can filter and search for it. So those types of tools, they're not terribly difficult from the SharePoint perspective. They're a skill set you have to learn and understand a little bit, but by pulling that all together, you can really make a clean user interface that should be fairly easy to use and have more than one way to get to important information. We also encourage standardizing kind of those communication sites, especially the landing page of each one, so that they're pretty consistent, right? So everything's in the same spot. If I go to HR or IT, or if I go to employee benefits versus payroll, quick links are in a certain spot, key contacts are in a certain part, FAQs are in a certain part, things like that. It'll just be easier to absorb as a user, where it's not like you get to a new site and everything's in a different spot. You're just trying to figure out where is the door that I need to go through here. So standardizing it and templating overall is important, and there's different ways to do that with PnP again, and templating. All right, and then the next real big thing is really start thinking about mobile access to this information these days, device access to this information, and really Viva Connections. So with Viva Connections, once you have a home site officially declared in your tenant, and you can only, well, I think you have more than one now that's starting to roll out, where you can audience target. But for a certain person, they only have really one home site. That can turn into an app in Teams. So they can stay in Teams, still get to your intranet or your Launchpad. But the dashboard components that you can build with Viva Connections are like quick links on steroids, where you can kind of do a little bit more than just link them off to the ticketing system. Maybe you can see your last couple tickets. And HR system providers like Workday are building their own Viva Connection widgets with that, let people see their time off, balance, stuff like that before going into like Workday completely. So kind of those dashboard widgets, which I'll show in a little bit, can be very powerful. And from a mobile perspective, in the Teams app on a mobile device, those things become more front and center when you go to your home site, quote unquote, in Teams. It's more of, okay, you're on a mobile device, so let's just give you the links you need based on the dashboard you define. All right. Go through kind of document centers as well, and then we'll demo a little bit to kind of show a few things. So document centers, since this is the SharePoint user group, that's a lot of what we've done in the past in our roles, where we've come from, really getting a lot of documents into SharePoint in different ways. I think there's a slight difference between things like official documents that have to be reviewed, approved, and then published in different ways out to the organization. Single source of truth. Document templating can be a little more magical than just a file on a drive somewhere. It can kind of tie into Office products like Word and PowerPoint if you take the right steps in Microsoft 365. And then, processes that produce a lot of artifacts. Hey, we've got to create a lot of documentation for the, IT change management process, release management process, anything like that. Really starting to organize and structure those types of, kind of document centers that I'm calling them, because I'm going back to the old word, that really helps pull that together and gives you a spot to put all those documents for the future. Some other things to consider there. Like SharePoint does have kind of major minor versioning, kind of a draft mode that only editors can see, and then kind of content approval before it's a major version. that gets a little complicated for most people. So unless you've got a highly trained kind of section of the organization that's doing that, we typically start with a draft and publish model where you're drafting in one location and publishing out, like really copying the final version to another place, or using an automation to maybe take an approved Word document, convert it to PDF, and then store it in the official location. So again, SharePoint looks like it can do it, and it can do it. I just think it gets a little complicated for the users to use it without being like highly trained on SharePoint, and that's may or may not need to be their full-time job on just to get documents out there. These document centers usually have a lot of complex security requirements to it. Hey, say it's budget and it's holding all the budgets for the different leaders through it for the next year as you're going through the approval process or something like that. And each area kind of needs their own security area to work on their budget or something like that. Again, while you can change the security document by document, just use folders that are a little more static. So then if you put the second document in that folder, it's automatically secured the right way. It's a little easier to understand, I think, from the end user perspective, using that context of the folder to know, how it should be secured and things like that. SharePoint or Microsoft 365, I should say, has the super special organizational assets library concept that you can use for document templates. So this, if you're in Word, you can go to a new in Word and then go to your organization and find your organizational Word templates while you stay in Word, and it will create a document based on that template, right? So it's not take that document, copy it, save it as a copy, as a template, right? It's an official template, a DOCX or DOTX as a Word template, for example. The key with this right now is that there's PowerShell to really turn it on in the end. And you can only point organizational assets in your tenant at one site collection. You can have multiple libraries on that same site collection, but you can't disperse, kind of the templates to multiple sites. So we've been just kind of creating an organizational assets site on the side just to do this. So, we had used it on the root intranet site at times, but sometimes those kind of change or move around over time anyway. So, we really have gone to its own site collection just to keep it simple, keep it kind of static overall. Sometimes your teams are coming from kind of shared drives with a lot of their files, and now we've got this weird cloud thing in front of them, and it's got Teams and SharePoint. Using the OneDrive Sync app where, the files on demand, they look like files on your computer. They may or may not be, depending on the scenario. But that really helps mimic a shared drive. So what used to be the S accounting folder is now a section in File Explorer where it's your organizational name and then the accounting kind of folder that you're synchronizing. So it really helps people you kind of roll into the cloud, find things kind of the way they're used to, but still take advantage of kind of the new cloud-based, synchronization, backup, offline capability, things like that you get out of the cloud without different than a shared drive. And the last thing that's fairly new, but kind of interesting is considering kind of a Viva Learning library. So I'll show that next. But Viva Learning is in the Viva stack. It's available to everybody with your general licensing for the first level of Viva Learning. Then there's kind of a license for the add-ons and some manager stuff you can do with Viva Learning. But Viva Learning can tie in a couple different training providers, content providers into also LinkedIn Learning and others kind of into this learning portal, we'll see. But one of the options is SharePoint, and there's one way you can just link to SharePoint, but if you kind of create a learning library in a certain way, you get some even more heavier capability. So let me jump over to a demo and start showing that. All right, so for those that haven't seen it or looked at it a lot, Viva Learning is a Teams app, and like I said, you will have some level of licensing for it with your base, subscription licenses with Teams and SharePoint. They'll have kind of Viva Learning with it. There's manager components to assign training to people and track where they're at with it, with kind of the paid for version of Viva Learning. But ultimately, with Viva Learning, it's meant for you to find learning across different content providers. The free version, you get the top 100 LinkedIn Learning classes that you can use. So I can do agile project management or something like that. But here's where, Badger Point Solutions is the name of this tenant here. And now these are documents that are actually stored in SharePoint that I can get through Viva Learning. I won't go into kind of all the setup there, except to say, since it stuck me for a little bit, you have to secure these documents with a Microsoft 365 security group. So you can't just, if this is a library where I just individually gave people access, it's not going to show up in Viva Learning. And if I use like a security group in Azure AD and not a Microsoft 365 group, these won't show up. So wasted a lot of my life looking at that, but it's somewhat documented, but it's highly important. So definitely reach out if you've got questions there. But overall, so these documents are all in, kind of a SharePoint library. That SharePoint library looks like this. It can kind of be just about any library that's secured properly in your organization. But to add to it, you can add a bunch of different metadata columns for like content description, change the image of the thumbnail, give it a duration in seconds, tag it to different metadata and different authors. So one of these came through, and so now all of this extra information we're supplying inside of Viva Learning is coming from the metadata inside of this SharePoint library. So we've done things where we can template this, so we can let people stamp out kind of a learning library on multiple sites, so it can show up in Viva Learning properly. From there, just one other note with Viva Learning, not a whole lot else you can do inside of here to organize your Viva Learning. It's kind of a search-based model more than, like, I can't create a new hire course or something like that, things like that yet. And I believe that's on the roadmap and coming, but it's not there. It's also not SCORM kind of related, right? So Viva Learning itself does nothing officially with SCORM and other things people try to do with learning systems overall. And then back to Viva Connections and the dashboard. So here, these are kind of Viva Connection dashboard widgets. Once you have a home site in SharePoint, you can start to configure and add, these widgets, kind of like adding them to a web page. As you can see, a lot of them are kind of links to something else. So this links to a time logging system, things like that. But it's kind of, on steroids a little bit, right? So you can put a little more information on here. These are technically adaptive cards. So they kind of follow the adaptive card model that's coming heavy in the future here. But you can also do other things, like now, not only can you show the next holiday, but you can start to kind of lay out, kind of in a panel, the next couple of them, or what else, whatever you want to do with that. This can be dynamic or static in different ways. If you're making it more dynamic, you'll need some development skills to kind of build it like a SharePoint framework web part. But you can see there's different concepts you can do inside of kind of these dashboard widgets. And going way back to Teams, this full court press app is the renamed Viva Connections I did in this tenant. So this is just the Viva Connections app in Teams with my name on it. And you can see it just starts to embed it inside of Teams. So now you've got that launch pad, that intranet to kind of put into it all. All right, I will pause there. Any questions, any topics, any discussion anyone wants to throw out there on kind of what we've talked about so far? Others, I'll keep going. All right. All right, so next, the next popular collaboration that happens at most companies would be like departments, right? So we all work on teams inside the organization, like a department. We need to share documents with that team and some others. We need to coordinate and communicate with our peers in different ways. So, might be tracking tasks or notes with that group of people, right? So everyone works with a group of people in some way, shape, or form. Who you report to in the structure, it could be a departmental one. What we find in this space, though, is really the challenge of what is a department. So in some organizations, it's pretty straightforward because, in a smaller mid-size organization, all the departments are pretty laid out and pretty well set up. But as you get to larger organizations, is that department, kind of IT? Well, wait a minute, IT has maybe 80 people in it. So is it like just infrastructure services or app dev? So this gets complicated as you start thinking about it, or maybe not complicated, but it's kind of a nuance that you may need to think about in your organization. So if you've got large teams, what really is the department we're talking about here? That might not be your word for department, right? Your word for department might be IT, but you've got teams in there that are called infrastructure services and app dev. So I think you need to think it through, especially as they get larger. And then I'm recommending that you usually take a follow the leader approach. So typically I would call a department a group of people that report to a single person. So even in those bigger teams, right, you're just going to have different layers of supervisors and managers that get up to director and VP or whatever you have. It's that group of people that report to one of those people that's the department team, really from an implementation standpoint. Because, I feel at 20 people or more, it's a gray number, not an exact, you're really not collaborating amongst each other anymore. So if we have a department of 80 people, I doubt you're going to get a good chat thread going that impacts all 80 people in the right way, right? That's where the tool may break down. It's going to be either never use chats or just it's going to be all this weird stuff not everyone wants. It's going to be confusing. It's going to be too much or something like that. I think at about 20 people or less in a department or a group of people, that's how you can collaborate. Even 20 is a lot of interconnections between everyone, but I think it's pretty easy way to kind of do that. So that's what I normally say is, follow the leader, right? So by looking at who reports to who, that usually breaks down. There's, it's rare that more than 20 people report to a single person without having another couple layers inside of there. It happens, and there's definitely scenarios where that's true, but in a lot of, especially corporate departments, usually you can use that to break it apart a little bit. And then look for 20 or less, or over 20 might be a problem, or over 30 might be a problem, something around there might be your trigger to really think about, maybe I should break this up differently. I also like to encourage, department collaboration to be specifically just for that department, and really make sure that it's not going external to the organization. So even though I am starting a document with my team that I do need to share with a vendor outside, there's a lot of risk to letting that happen in a departmental team, because there's a lot of other things going on in that team that probably does not need to get into out to the outside world directly. We recommend sensitivity labels at the container level, so you can make a team or a site and give that a sensitivity label. You can also do that with individual documents in different ways. This is the container level one, and I'll show that in a little bit too. But once you start creating these internal use only kind of labels, it visually shows up, so it's a nice reminder to people that it's internal use only, and you can use it to make sure it's a private team only, make sure you can't share externally, even if, you have the team settings in this case set up differently. So we'll look at that a little bit, but we recommend that. I also try to use the other tabs inside of Teams for things like OneNote and Planner to encourage the use of them, right? So for people newer to 365, you're in a department, you probably have to take notes, that shared notes somewhere for some sort of topic, or there's tasks that get assigned to people in different ways, simple follow-up tasks, not huge projects necessarily, but by just adding the tab there, it makes it more visible that these tools are there and available for use, that could help you adopt those tools to be more productive inside your organization. So on the file server side and then the historical traditional side, a lot of departments on file shares were built with a private public model, right? Okay, and here's the accounting folder, and inside of there's accounting private and accounting public, and we put the stuff just for accounting in the private folder, and we put the public stuff into another location that other people can see. It's not a bad way to do it, but since this is heading towards teams to implement a department, the challenge is teams rules work a little differently. So a standard team, every member is read-write to everything in it. You can create a private channel, but that's a subset of that departmental team. So that gets complicated if you're adding people outside your team into a private channel. You really can't. And shared channels now will actually solve that. But that's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of back-end components that are being built for you, new SharePoint sites, things like that, that may overcomplicate what you're trying to do as well. But I'll also demonstrate in a little bit, what you could do is your Files tab in Teams is your internal private documentation, but then add a tab to a SharePoint library somewhere else that is the public document. So back to those official documents or something else over there. By doing all of that, you still kind of have this public-private concept. If I'm in the department, I kind of can see them together a little bit, even though they're spread out across the organization. So again, I'll demo that in a little bit, but there's a couple ways to do that. With larger teams, sometimes I call them divisions then at that point, or just whatever. The wording is up to your organization and what you guys, guys think of. But one option we have tried that has worked a little bit with larger teams too is, okay, well, yes, 80 people won't all chat together, but we still want a single team for it all, for the files or something like that. Well, you can change the settings on a channel about who can post. So only owners can post, for example. So you could create a bigger team, um, change the general channel so that it's owners only can post, and then just have the owners post more announcements in there than kind of chat, right? So this we're going to communicate out to everybody that something's happening to that bigger group of 80 people or whatever we want it to be. But that's all we're going to do. All right. All right. So let me demo again. All right. So departments. So jumping ahead, departments are great spots for teams, right? So you need a place for them to chat, communicate. You need a spot for files, things like that. So, so in this case, it's just a departmental team for like a marketing department. With that, one thing that's here, so this is the sensitivity label. So by applying the sensitivity label and setting it up, you've got this great visual indicator that says, hey, you know what, this is internal use only. So anything I do here is not going to allow me to move it out into the outside world in any different way. Again, you've got your spot for your internal files. Again, encourage the use of OneNote and Planner with tabs that could be kind of preset on here so that people have a workspace for that entire team, departmental team to work. But now let's look at product documentation. So what this is a tab, a SharePoint tab, but it just goes to a completely different SharePoint site. So this is not part of this team. It's a standalone, kind of document center that we talked about earlier, where it can store and organize all of the different documents that are needed for that part of the organization. So marketing, for example, maybe they post the product documentation and marketing materials collateral to a centralized location for others to get. Maybe we can put it here. So now you kind of have your private files and your public product documentation really all in one spot for marketing so that they can, kind of manage documents similar to before, but a little different and a little expanded to kind of meet the Microsoft 365 rules without getting too complicated. All right. Let's see, other concepts here, you'll start to see on my examples here, naming conventions, right? So as people become part of multiple teams, it might start to be helpful to start giving it a prefix of some sort, either department, the full word, or DEPT, or whatever you come up with in different ways. But then you can really start to organize your different teams in different ways. So, kind of getting that all set, I think can be important. All right, so again, kind of straightforward with, kind of departmental teams. One other example I'll jump to, and then we'll come back to it later again, is you can also use channels to subdivide, bigger departments overall. So in this case, maybe a larger engineering department, maybe they're regionally based. They can all see each other's information, but so these are just kind of shared or general channels, overall standard channels. But you've got a spot for Central US chat and files, and Eastern US chat and files. Then maybe you turn kind of this general channel into kind of a announcement only side. So this is where you can take the channel and have only owners post messages to it. So what they can do is, if you really train them right, is kind of going into here, creating an actual announcement announcement post, and kind of have a welcome to the team type of post, right? So So that's a little hidden away in the formatting side of a channel post, but if you kind of use it that way, it looks a little different. People can see that it's intended for a different purpose than just kind of a two-way chat, and more about one-way announcements and pushing things overall. All right. Any other scenarios? I'm going to pause for just 1 minute or so here. One, I need a drink, but two, any other scenarios, complex scenarios, or anything you've run into your organization you either solved in a creative way or need help with yet, that maybe the group can help with? All right, we'll keep going then. All right, so now it's going to get a little more complicated, a little more repetitive. So after we kind of got those base areas set up for kind of your departmental teams and your organizational structure, your document storage, we're starting to tackle kind of the core. Now let's start talking about things like projects. So for projects, there's a lot of different types of projects, right? There's just kind of ad hoc things that come and go, right? Hey, we've got to plan, the holiday party, or we've planned just a team outing, 4 weeks from now, or a potluck, or something that's a little complicated but not too complicated. Then you may or may not have a PMO or structured projects, but if you do have more structured projects, there's a lot you can do to make sure everyone uses Teams the same way. So we'll talk about that, but maybe with a structured project, you want to track issues the same way across all of the sites. Maybe you want to track project status the same way across all the different project sites. Again, because if you do it right with content types, you can roll it up then across all those projects, no matter where they are. You may want to differentiate, projects with external collaboration versus ones that are internal only. And you may want to add more approval to external collaboration. So your tenant may or may not allow it, but if it allows it, maybe the governance is still, hey, before you actually use it with somebody, we want to make sure we know who you're using it with and approve that before we really turn that external collaboration on. So, it can definitely be done securely in powerful ways, even more now with Teams Connect and shared channels. But, security, especially in regulated industries, will have your organization will have more concerns, and you'll have more to kind of tackle and deal with an external project. And there's special types of projects in my mind. So something like a merger and acquisition is a project somewhat. So it's a project to figure out if you're going to merge or acquire someone, and there's steps and tasks, and all of these things we're talking about when it relates to projects are time-based. So the key for me with a project is a project has an end date. So it may be in a week, it may be in 2 years, but if it ends, it is a project of some sort. So that's why merger and acquisition kind of threw in here. It's kind of a unique kind of thought of that, but we're seeing a lot more companies needing to deal with that in different ways. And there's a lot of security and privacy needed across that process, right? You can't have the entire organization know, hey, we might buy this other company, because there's lots of reasons not to tell everybody. All right, things to consider here. We looked at it a little bit in the last demo, but naming conventions to differentiate it, but also maybe naming conventions. Well, I'll show an example where you can provision one with like a project number that might be in a different system, or just kind of be the tool you're using to officially approve projects, and you can kind of put kind of the project number into the name automatically, things like that. I will say beware of public teams. So when you create a team, they can be public or private. And public teams are fine, right? In the concept of a project, it's not a terrible idea, because if the information in the project can be seen by anyone in the organization, public teams allow people to just join the team with a request instead of having to go through kind of a different approval process or have the owner add them in different ways. So it's easier to join a team. And team membership on a project is usually pretty fluid, or could be fluid in lots of cases. So public project teams can be a good idea, but the key is everyone in the organization has read-only access to the documents on a project team, even if they're not a member of the team. So the everyone group has read-only to the documentation for a public team. So definitely don't use it for your departmental teams or secured leadership teams or something like that that cannot be opened up, the M&A team here, because membership isn't the only way. Membership just lets them see the chat, but the documents they'll see read only. So that also could be a benefit depending on what you're trying to really do with that team. Maybe that is the end goal. You want read only to the documents, but not the chat. But keep that in mind. It's a little hidden gem that you need to be aware of. So inside of a department, if you're just doing a lot of small projects that kind of come and go, and sometimes people have like incidents or something like that from like an IT service perspective or something like that, an incident really could be a project of sorts that starts and ends until you figure it out. But that might be where channels come into play. I mean, if the group of people that need to collaborate on that project, quote unquote, is the same people and only the same people that are part of your department. Creating multiple channels might be a cleaner way of doing it, kind of simple, keeps it all in place, less team sprawl overall. So definitely a consideration for channels there. But understand the pros and cons of multiple channels. So my experience is still having lots of channels hasn't really paid off for most people I've worked with. So generally having the single general channel is more than enough to do what you need to do, especially to get started into teams. A lot of channels for different areas sounds pretty good on the front end, but in the day-to-day action, it sometimes is overkill. Like, what channel do I put it in? Now I got this one, I've got that one. Things get a little more lost there. So again, you can use multiple channels. There's a lot of pros to that, but my experience just says you may be overcomplicating it for no reason. Maybe you just start with a general channel and move on. And then the last here is this is where Microsoft may fall a little short out of the box. But you can do a lot of automated provisioning to control that naming and security, and this is where we'll kind of demo next. So now as you're starting to get to all of these repeatable projects that come and go, it's not kind of a one-time setup. What do I do? How do I manage that? So, all right. So let me go back here. All right. So from Microsoft perspective. Right, people can create teams. They can create teams from these templates that you can create control. It's in the Teams Admin Center. It basically gives you what channels you have and what apps are involved with those different channels. But it doesn't really help you beyond that, right? So, it's harder to preset sensitivity. You can have a single default, not multiple defaults. The privacy, kind of, you can't really control what people pick necessarily. So as you need more control, like an M&A team, project team, or just your project teams in general, this create a team function is a little too much, right? A lot of flexibility, but a lot of responsibility. We've seen it get out of hand lots and lots of places. So then what does IT do or admins do? Admins then lock that down. So you can lock this down. So you can only create a team if you're in a certain security group. So then the admins get a ticket, they create the team the way they want to, and people have to put in a request, and so far. So neither way works perfect. If you're doing a lot of repetition, there's delays, there's still potential things you could miss maybe overall in the different sides of things. So, full disclosure, we built this tool, but we've built a tool, for this because we've seen this enough now where we got through the strategies where we found that it's a good strategy. We've kind of laid it out the way we want, but how do you implement it and how do you keep up with it? So after, kind of looking at different options and automating it manually in different ways for different organizations, we've kind of come up with this standardized way to do it in this tool. What a lot of it's the Graph API under the covers, but ultimately what you're doing here is you can kind of create these different templates or types of things you want to build in your environment based on your rules, and really define everything that can happen to them in lots of different ways. So with a project team, for example, we can, let you, kind of give it a name, but here's that project number. You can say, okay, they've got to put a project number in on the request. Down here, this you can choose to make it, let them choose, or, like external sharing this, they can't change this. It has to be internal only. You can do different things with membership to be the requester or whatever you want. And you can apply leases to things so they expire, expire after 90 days or you extend the lease. With this request, after you submit it, you can also choose to, have things that are approved or not overall. So, kind of jumping ahead, so I put in my request. In this case, maybe the PMO has to approve it. They approve it. What can come out the other side now is really a standardized project site that's named the way we want to. It's using the project number in the name of the actual team itself. And it can even do, it's adding the channels we're thinking of for the template we're talking about. But then even this issues channel might be a spot where you discuss issues and work it. But ultimately, this tracker tab goes back to a Microsoft list or a SharePoint list that's added automatically to that team, that project team, so that they all have the same kind of format. So we use a PMP template on the SharePoint side that where we can apply this list definition and this whole site structure however we want to really allow you to do consistent things across kind of that category or template. All right, so from the project perspective, that's one of the scenarios. So great stuff for like PMO projects. We can define, the different channels we want to use, because maybe financials is a private channel that's only to the PM and the owner or something like that. Maybe the general tab doesn't have, only owners can post to that one. However, whatever you can think of, however you want to do that, you can now make consistent. But if we go to the M&A example, so now you've got other things like, okay, so now this team is creating kind of an M&A opportunity for, hey, maybe we're going to acquire Contoso, right? So internally, people have to start storing files, starting to discuss that a little bit in the process. But over the course of time with M&A, maybe they have to add different people to the team and different layers to the team, right? So initially, maybe there's due diligence that has to happen before you get too far. But maybe later you need to add the technology component. Okay, now that we're down the road enough, we know we're going to kind of do it. So now we have to start gathering some system information because we're going to have to start integrating these two companies at some point. And you want to use another channel for that because we want the technical people not to see the due diligence information, and probably the due diligence people not seeing the technical information. So how do we do something like that? Well, we can do some of that in what are called actions on these templates as well. So after we get these team sites, whatever, team sites, Yammer communities can all be built with this type of a tool. Once we have that built, Well, we can actually apply different actions to this M&A Contoso team. So we can actually even lock down the team itself. So there's no team owner, so they can't delete it. They can't add new people without us knowing. They can't add a channel without us knowing. So you can really lock owners out of it, even though they created it. But then use the actions to maybe say, okay, if you're going to add kind of a new member to the team here, let me try to add a new member to this M&A team. And we're like, well, wait a minute, before people do that, we want that approved. So that's going to submit. The approver is going to get a task. And now I can go in here and say, all right, should John be added, kind of to this team, and I can approve or reject. So maybe I'm like, oh, wait, no, he's not supposed to be on this team yet. And you can really reject it before it even happens. You don't have to remove it after it's there, have other terrible things happen overall. Otherwise, you can also do things like here. So now let's say, okay, all right, we're to the point we're ready for technology to happen, integration to happen. So you can kind of set up what types of channels can be created after the fact. And I'm gonna create the technology channel. It's predefined a certain way. So if it's a public or private channel, we can do that. If there's approval needed, we can do that, and there is. So now in this case, I want to create a new channel, and I'm going to approve it this time, and it's going to chug its way through. And ultimately, this team is now going to get that new technology channel built the way we want to. In this case, I think it's a private channel. And we could even add people to it, the certain ways. So now that we're here, going to refresh the UI. There you go. There's a new private channel for technology to work. We could automatically add the exact people to it at that time, the right groups at that time, and you've got a kind of a fully controlled system. From there, there's endless amounts of things you can do that we figured out with kind of your Graph API and more. So again, strategically having the categories and everything we're talking about is great, but really getting it automated is the holy grail on the other end of it. We've also thought of things like, hey, I already have teams, now what do I do? Well, you can import them to these templates. So you can actually do things like, take a list of existing teams and map them to the templates that are here and kind of import them into the management of the system so that you can then apply the naming convention after the fact and rename it later or do other things overall. Like I said before, there's employee resource group as an example where you can create a Yammer community off of here with or without approval. Maybe that approval goes to HR, not admins. Those departments we can create off a standardized template. The Viva Learning sites we could kind of create that way. M&A. Different things you can think of. You can kind of define and build out overall. One last component about projects is newer. So we've done it less, looked at it a little bit, still kind of gauging kind of the maturity of shared channels. But one other thing to note, especially with something like a project, I think it's going to be a good idea in the future to take things like, maybe you have a bunch of smaller projects or something like that. They're all in one team and they're different channels. But you can create this shared channel now kind of in this engineering projects team. So, people in kind of that group, which could be a couple different areas in your organization are members of these in different ways. But here's where you can, you can invite the entire engineering department so it shows up inside of their channels. And what's happening is this shared project channel is the same as this one. So, as you start doing things like chatting, I think, and you start adding files, Yeah, fun. Let's see if I can add a new file. That is one and the same. So it's one location, but it shows up in two different places. So that I think is a great it's great to have. There's my chats finally. But now you can see that I can get to the exact same thing either through this channel in this team or this channel in this team. So it's a little new. So I want to kind of understand the nuances. We've definitely seen that some of these apps, that's a shorter list than the full list of apps. So some apps like this don't work in shared channels right now, some things like that. So there's definitely nuances since it's new from the Microsoft stack. But this is a concept as well where if you have a lot of like smaller projects, but they're incidents or they're jobs from the manufacturing side, maybe shared projects and things like this can work because now I can give people that aren't in the engineering department access to this shared project. Without giving them access to my overall department team. Because here's where you can kind of give another team access to it at the same time. All right, so projects, there's lots of types of projects, definitely. We're seeing a lot more M&A activity or secured work, where you've got hey, we're healthcare and we do use this vendor all the time to do some process, but we've got to securely do it and securely create new workspaces for them somehow. So that's kind of how we've been thinking about it. And then some other scenarios here, just in interest of time, we won't dig into a lot, but as you start getting to more cross-functional teams that are across different departments and just the random people, but they're a little more ongoing than with an end date like a project. You might get role-based teams, teams, champions, groups, leadership teams that go across the different, all across the org, and things like that. We'll look a little bit at locations and branches. So like I said earlier, some industries have a lot of branches or locations, both from a manufacturing side, maybe, 3 or 4 buildings do the same thing, but differently, or, it's more important to communicate at that location than kind of a corporate kind of viewpoint. So locations and branches might kick in as another popular type of team or group that you need. Regulated sites. This is where you could really create templates for really narrowing in the security, the metadata, things like that. ISO document libraries, things like that, to say, okay, we need document libraries for each kind of department or group where they can store their procedures and policies, but it's got to be managed the right way, right? They've got to be revision history and tracking and approval, so we can be ISO certified or something like that. I know the food industry has some FDA type of regulations that as you're kind of building out you're kind of creating a new food product, that you have to follow certain rules on testing and documentation and things like that. So having kind of regulated sites are bigger in other industries. We do work with different types of property management companies too, where each property they manage, there's documents they need related to that. There's conversations they need related to that one property. Having teams for each property or SharePoint sites in a very specific way to keep it consistent, organized, but give everyone their own workspace. We've seen a lot of that as well. All right, so I'll get into the demos, but probably just pause there. I did the shared channels concept already, but from a branch perspective, here, sometimes, and again, size might matter, right? So if there's only like 20 people at the branch, maybe a single team with multiple channels for kind of like the different areas like compliance or, loan processing for, if this was banking and financial, maybe those are, kind of a better way to do it than having like a Milwaukee loan processing team and then a Milwaukee compliance team. The other thing you'd want to just think about is overall with the branches and these departments, like, is loan processing more of a centralized function across the entire organization, or is it distributed to each branch to do it differently, and how you want to handle that? That gets complicated. I think shared channels is really going to help with that in the long haul, but right now that's a logical problem that definitely needs to get solved. All right, I'll pause here one more time because that's the last I have for the demo, and then I'll start kind of wrapping up. But any other comments, scenarios, any other things people are running into for the group to help with in some way? All right. So to wrap up then, again, categorizing out the different types of things you're doing and workspaces you kind of need to build for your organization, I believe is the best way to break it apart just enough to keep it manageable, even though there's nuances and complexity across every organization. Especially that centralized, decentralized concept is all over every organization. But if you start kind of breaking them apart, and then even breaking apart the different sections like collaboration into more components, you should be able to come up with a pretty clean plan, probably 10 types of templates or less for most size organizations, that you could then look to like automate and roll out across your organization, so that you've got a managed environment. It's going to be built the way you want it to, with the templates you want, security you want, the expiration you want, and things like that, approvals you want. So breaking apart will help. If everything's a CAFG inventorium, that gets a lot harder, but if you break it apart, it will work easier. Other things to consider here overall, after doing this for a while, is I would say when it comes to the products involved, organize your teams around people. So a team's team is a bunch of people working on something. So that's, to look for the groups of people that are working together in different ways. The team's champions are a group of people working one way. The people in IT are a group of people working another way. People on a project are a group of people working a different way. Organizing that around the people that are involved, I think really is a key principle to help you make final decisions, because SharePoint's probably more about the content. So now organize SharePoint around the content. So these are budget files, or these are onboarding documents, or this is training material. You're kind of organizing your SharePoint sites and your documents really around the content itself, not the people, because SharePoint's better to go to a lot of different people in a read-only way, so everything is everyone, so that the people doesn't really help you break it down, but the content itself will. So, and have different spots for different things. So policies and procedures go here, invoices go there. Breaking it apart usually helps kind of get you to a simple plan. And these days, don't forget to add Viva to your thoughts and strategy. So we looked at Viva Learning for training materials and some things you can do with SharePoint to kind of make it a little bit better overall. Viva Connections are those dashboard widgets, and really getting to kind of your home site, internet or not, inside of Teams. Those are two real big areas to not forget about overall as it comes to your strategy, because I think they're they're new ways of thinking. They're going to be built out more and more by Microsoft over the next couple of years. You know, Viva Topics is also related a lot to the reference process information, where you can tag large sets of invoices with AI and do a lot of other things, or get, you know, organizational information kind of automated, you know, kind of extracted from your existing documentation instead of you having to type it all out. So Viva will be important over the, you know, next couple of years. There's simple entry points to some of these with what you might be doing in your overall strategy. With that, thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.
No questions, Jonathan. Thanks for hosting this demo.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to stop recording then, and everyone can have a good day. I'll hang on for a little bit though as well.